Snow had been falling for 3 days straight, swallowing the mountain whole. The world outside Ellie Jameson's cabin was white and wordless, save for the groan of pine trees bowing under ice. Inside, the fire crackled like an old friend who refused to leave. Ellie sat by the window, her coffee long gone cold, watching the wind carve shapes in the snow. Solitude didn't scare her anymore. She'd built her peace plank by plank, after life had taken everything else. Out here, silence wasn't punishment. It was the only thing that listened. She'd lived alone for 8 winters now, tucked high above the valley where folks still gossiped and prayed for mercy. They called her the Cowgirl on the Ridge, half in awe, half in fear. They said she talked to ghosts, that her heart had frozen the night her husband and son vanished in a blizzard. Ellie never corrected them. Let people believe what made sense. Truth was simpler. She'd learned how to survive without noise, without promises. The only voices she trusted came from the wind and the wood stove. That night, as the storm thickened, she was mending an old saddle strap when a sound cut through the wind, faint but certain. Knocking. Slow, hesitant, human. Ellie froze. Nobody came this high. Not in winter, not alive. She set the leather aside, took her rifle from the wall, and crossed to the door. The knocking came again, weaker now. She opened it, just a crack, snow swirling in like smoke. 2 figures stood there, an old man leaning on a stick and an older woman wrapped in a torn blanket. Their faces were gray with cold. "Please," the woman whispered, "we can't walk anymore." Ellie hesitated, heart thudding slow and hard. She'd told herself long ago never to let strangers in, not since the nightmen had tried to take what wasn't theirs. But the woman's eyes were soft and frightened, like a horse cornered by lightning. "All right," Ellie said finally. "Come on then." She opened the door wider. The old man stumbled in first, dragging Snow with him, his breath rasping. The woman followed, shivering so bad her teeth chattered. Ellie shut the door and latched it tight. "Sit by the fire," she ordered. "Now." The cabin filled with the smell of melting snow and human fear. Ellie stirred the coals and threw on another log. The fire flared, casting gold over the strangers' faces. The old man's beard was white as the drifts outside, his hands trembling but kind. The woman pressed her palms toward the heat, whispering thanks over and over. Ellie poured them coffee, black and bitter. "Ain't much," she said, "but it'll wake your bones." The man nodded. "We thought we'd die out there." Ellie sipped her own cup. "You still might," she said, "if you don't eat." She warmed up stew from the pot hanging over the fire. Venison, potatoes, onions. The smell filled the small room, thick and comforting. The woman's eyes watered. "Smells like heaven." Ellie handed her a bowl. "Tastes better than snow." The old man smiled faintly. "You live up here alone?" "Been that way a while," she said. "Ain't much left to say to people who think grief is contagious." He nodded slowly. "Grief's the only thing that ever keeps us company." His wife nudged him. "Don't start with your preaching, Samuel." Ellie almost smiled. "Preachin' I can handle. Lies I can't." They ate in silence for a while, the storm screaming against the walls. When the bowls were empty, Ellie fetched blankets and laid them near the hearth. "You can sleep there," she said. "Fire'll hold through the night." The woman looked up, eyes glassy. "We'll leave come morning. We don't mean to trouble you." "You already have," Ellie said, but her voice was softer now. She turned away before they could see the flicker of kindness behind her words. "Sleep while the world lets you." That night, Ellie couldn't rest. The wind howled, pressing cold fingers through every crack in the cabin. She sat by the window again, rifle across her knees, watching shadows shift against the snow. The 2 strangers slept soundly by the fire, their breathing steady. Something about them unsettled her. Maybe it was how they'd found her at all this deep into nowhere. Or maybe it was the way the woman had said we can't walk anymore, like it meant something more than tired legs. The kind of words people speak when they've given up on being found. At dawn, the storm broke. The world was glass and light, silence so deep it hurt to breathe. Ellie stepped outside to feed her mare, Pearl, who snorted clouds into the cold. The snow was knee-deep, the sky clean and cruelly blue. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. The old man stepped out, leaning on the frame. "Ain't seen sun like that in months," he said. Ellie didn't turn. "You shouldn't be on your feet." "I've been on 'em too long," he said. "What's one more day?" His tone was light, but his eyes carried years. She led him back inside and poured fresh coffee. The woman was already awake, humming softly as she folded the blankets. "You've got a good home," she said. "Quiet. That's the point," Ellie replied. "World gets too loud. You come higher till you can't hear it no more." The woman smiled sadly. "Until someone knocks." Ellie met her gaze. "Until someone knocks." For a moment, the air between them was heavy, with something unspoken, a recognition older than names. As the morning warmed, the strangers told their story. They'd been traveling west, chasing rumors of work and warmer air. Their wagon broke near the ridge, and the storm found them before shelter did. "We were ready to lie down in the snow," Samuel said. "Then we saw smoke from your chimney. Figured that meant a kind soul lived here." Ellie laughed once, dry as wood. "Could have meant a mean one, too. Mean folks don't share their fire," the woman said softly. Ellie looked away. "Don't bet on it." By noon, the sky turned gray again, snowflakes drifting lazy and soft. The old couple dozed by the fire, peaceful in a way that made Ellie's chest ache. She went to the barn to check the feed, but her mind kept wandering back to them, how fragile they looked, how out of place they seemed in this world of claw and wind. When she returned, the woman was awake, staring into the fire. "You ever get lonely up here?" she asked. Ellie shrugged. "Loneliness ain't the worst thing to live with. You get used to it. Makes the world quiet enough to think." The woman nodded slowly. "And what do you think about?" "Things that can't answer back," Ellie said. "The past, the sky, the way snow falls the same on graves and roofs." The woman smiled faintly. "You talk like someone waiting to be forgiven." Ellie's hand stilled on the kettle. "Ain't waitin' on nothin'," she said. "Just listenin' for what comes next." The woman's eyes softened. Maybe that's the same thing. Ellie looked away, throat tight. She didn't like being seen that clearly. That evening, the wind picked up again. Ellie nailed extra planks over the windows and checked the roof. When she came back inside, the couple were holding hands by the fire. "Storm's coming back," Ellie said. "You best stay another night." The woman smiled gently. "You're kind, dear." Ellie shook her head. "No, just practical." Samuel chuckled. "Practical's the kindest kind of all." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made Ellie frown. "You sick?" "Just old," he said. But she wasn't sure she believed him. The night fell heavy and fast. Snow rattled the shutters, and the fire threw long shadows across the cabin walls. Ellie sat sharpening her knife, the sound steady and clean. The woman watched her quietly. "You don't trust people much, do you?" "Trust got me buried half my life ago," Ellie said. "Ain't eager to dig it back up." "Maybe trust didn't bury you," the woman said softly. "Maybe love did." Ellie's hand paused. "Love's the same thing when you live through it twice." The woman's gaze dropped. "Not always." Near midnight, Samuel woke coughing again. Worse this time. Ellie helped him sit up, her rough hands surprisingly gentle. "Here," she said, pouring him water. "Slow." He took a sip, then caught her wrist lightly. "You've got your son's eyes," he murmured. Ellie froze. "What'd you say?" The old man blinked, confused. "I sorry. Must be the fever talkin'." But something in his tone chilled her. She rose, heart pounding. "Get some rest," she said. "We'll talk in the morning." She went to the door, opened it a crack, and let the cold air bite her lungs. The mountain felt suddenly too small. Sleep didn't come. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, listening to their breathing behind her. The woman stirred once, murmuring in her sleep a name Ellie hadn't heard in years. James. Her son's name. Ellie's chest constricted. She turned sharply, watching their faces in the firelight. They looked peaceful, untouched by guilt or storm, but her mind wouldn't quiet. What were the odds two strangers would find her here, speak words from her buried past? Outside, the wind howled, like laughter she didn't understand. At dawn, the storm had eased again. Ellie rose early, made coffee, and stepped outside. The air was sharp, clean, too calm. She turned toward the ridge where the snow had thinned and froze. There were no wagon tracks, no trail, nothing but untouched snow leading down into the trees. She looked back at the cabin, two strangers asleep who had supposedly climbed a mountain through a blizzard. "No," she whispered, "that don't make sense." Her hand tightened on the coffee pot. "Ain't nothing about this makes sense." She went back inside. The couple were still sleeping, breath shallow but steady. Ellie crouched beside them, studying their faces. Samuel's hand rested on his wife's, fingers curled like roots in the earth. There was peace there, too perfect for life. "You're not strangers, are you?" she whispered. "You came looking for something else." The woman's eyes fluttered open. "We came looking for rest," she said, "and for forgiveness." Ellie swallowed hard. "Whose?" The woman smiled faintly. "Yours." Then she closed her eyes again. Ellie sat frozen as the morning light spilled through the window, touching their faces like a blessing. The air felt different, lighter, almost holy. Outside, the wind had stopped completely. She reached out and touched the woman's hand. It was cool, still. Ellie bowed her head. "Rest, then," she whispered. "Both of you." The fire crackled once, bright and soft, as if in reply. For the first time in years, Ellie felt tears warm her cheeks. The mountain, quiet witness to her loneliness, finally listened and answered with silence. Morning didn't so much arrive as soften. The light came in like a careful hand, touching the cabin's corners and stopping at the two still shapes by the hearth. Ellie sat a while without moving, head in her lap, letting the quiet finish its sentence. Grief can be thunder. Today it was snowfall, slow and relentless. She rose, cleared the table, set water to heat, and rolled her sleeves to the elbow. Work steadied what sorrow unraveled. "You asked for rest," she murmured to them. "I'll see to it proper." The stove sighed, and the mountain breathed with her. She pulled the old pine boards from behind the shed, the ones she'd been saving for a porch she never started. The saw sang through wood, a steady prayer. She planed edges smooth, with the patience heartbreak sometimes teaches. Outside, snow squeaked beneath her boots. Inside, the cabin kept a vigilant silence. Ellie measured twice, cut once, and laid the planks together until the shape of two boxes suggested itself humble, honest. "Best I got," she said to no one. She wiped sawdust from her cheek with the back of her wrist and kept the blade moving. By midday, two coffins rested on quilts before the fire. She lined them with the least worn blankets she owned, the red one her boy had dragged to every nap, and the gray that had warmed her husband's shoulders the winter before the blizzard. It felt like betrayal to give them up. It felt like mercy to do it. She cleaned the old couple's hands with warm water, smoothed hair, buttoned a torn hem. Death had quieted their faces into a kind of truth. "You look like people I might have known," she whispered. "Maybe I did." She carved two crosses by the doorway, small shavings curling like pale feathers onto the floor. Names would have been kinder, but names were scarce up here. She tried one anyway, scratching letters with the tip of her knife. Samuel on one, Ruth on the other. She didn't know if the names fit. They felt right in her mouth when the fire cracked. Outside, the sky lowered, not threatening, just heavy with memory. Ellie set the crosses aside, breathed into her cupped hands, and let the ache move through without argument. Pain passed quicker when it wasn't resisted. Before closing the lids, she gathered the old couple's meager belongings: a worn shawl, a pocket knife, a tin with loose buttons, a book with no cover. In the shawl's deep hem, her fingers found a stiffness that cloth shouldn't carry. Threads had been stitched and re-stitched, clumsy over careful. She slit the seam gently and drew out a folded envelope. Oil darkened at the corners. Her name was on it, E. Jameson, written in a thin hand that trembled even on paper. She sat down hard on the chair. The room tilted. The stove returned her to level. The letter smelled faintly of smoke and lavender. She unfolded it slowly, as if it might change its mind about being read. "Miss Jameson," it began, "if we are found where your warm light is, please know we did not come to take. We came to return what we took without knowing." Ellie's heartbeat stuttered. "Years ago, in a storm like yours, a boy knocked at our rented door down in the hollow. He said his name was James, and that he'd lost the trail to his ma's cabin on the ridge." The room narrowed to words. "We fed him stew and wrapped him in our only good blanket," the letter went on. "But fear is a poor counselor. Men were robbing wagons that winter, and the landlord swore we'd lose our place if we kept strays. We sent the boy back with a lantern and foolish prayers instead of our courage. He never arrived. When spring found his scarf in the trees, our lives soured into apology. We have walked toward your door ever since, the long way through the years." Ellie's hand shook. The paper rattled like wings. "If mercy lives in you, forgive our smallness. We are old and late. If we die on your floor, let it be witness that some debts seek to pay themselves with the last thing we have our asking. Ruth and Samuel Carter." The name struck like a bell. Carter, she remembered the rumor of a couple who had tended a lamp in the hollow and then vanished under it. Ellie folded the page and set it on the table, palms pressed to wood until her breath returned to its rightful shape. "James," she whispered, and his name didn't cut this time. She carried the coffins outside, one at a time, shoulders finding that old rhythm: bear up, then bend, then bear again. The snow was light by afternoon, a sifted veil. At the spruce that watched her ridge, she stomped a rectangle flat with methodical steps, then cut into the earth with a short-handled spade warmed by her grip. Frost fought her. She won by patience. The first grave opened slowly, like a stiff throat yielding to water. She rested when the ache insisted, drank snowmelt, and kept carving down into forgiveness. She brought Ruth first, the shawl tucked around thin shoulders, the letter folded beneath gentle hands. Ellie lingered before lowering the coffin, fingers resting on the lid, as if it were a brow that still knew her touch. "I read it," she said. "That's the part that matters." The spruce pinched a little snow from its branches, letting it fall like blessing. Ellie set the cross. Ruth carved deep and stepped back. The mountain did not applaud. It held the peace that follows a right act done quietly. Samuel's grave took longer. Old men, she remembered, always carried more weight. When they were gone, names, decisions, things they meant to repair. She lowered him with the same care, the same small bow of the head. "You shouldn't have listened to landlords," she said softly. "But I've listened to worse." She tamped earth back into place with the flat of her spade, the thud of final syllable. When the second cross stood, she leaned her forehead against the wood. It was cold and honest. She stayed until the cold was no longer an enemy. Back in the cabin, she set 2 tin bowls by the fire and lit candles in each, the way her mother had done when storms took names from the valley. The flames made stubborn halos that bent but didn't break. Ellie poured coffee and sat on the floor between them, letter across her knees. "I won't pretend it didn't hurt," she told the room, "but hurt ain't the end." Outside, snow stitched the day shut. Inside, the candles taught the dark how to be gentle. Ellie closed her eyes and let the mountain hum in her bones. By dusk, hoofbeats sounded on the lower trail, cautious and many. She stepped onto the porch, rifle easy in her hands, and waited. 3 riders crested the rise. Sheriff Pike from town, May from the mercantile bundled in a coat too fine for weather, and Harlan, the sawyer, whose hands were better at carrying grief than goods. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Saw smoke, Miss Jameson. Not the scared kind. Thought we'd check anyway." Ellie nodded toward the spruce. "I had company for a night." May's eyes softened. "We heard." The hollow carried words up like birds. They tied horses with the reverence winter teaches and followed Ellie to the graves. No one spoke at first. The sheriff knelt, gloved fingers brushing the carved letters. "Do they have kin?" "They had a debt," Ellie said, offering the letter. He read quick, careful, mouth tightening at the right places. When he finished, he handed it back as if it might break. "You want witnesses?" "I want it written somewhere beyond me," she answered. "So the valley learns to measure mercy wider than door sills." May's breath fogged. "We'll tell it right," she promised. "Not as gossip, as lesson." In the cabin, Ellie poured coffee for all and ladled stew she'd warmed because grief prefers spoons to speeches. Harlan ran a thumb over the small wooden bird on the mantel the old man's whittling. "Looks like flight," he murmured. May laid 2 knitted squares on the table. "Was making these for a baby?" she said, voice barely sound. "Seems they'll do as altar cloths just the same." The sheriff stared into flame. "Town said you were hard," he told Ellie. "I'll correct 'em." She shrugged. "I'm practical." He smiled without humor. "Same thing on a good day." When they left, they carried the story with them, like a lantern cupped from wind. Ellie stood in the doorway until their shapes were swallowed by gray. The world grew quiet again, but not empty. She cleaned bowls, folded quilts, and laid fresh wood by the stove. As she swept the floor, her broom found the shallow groove where James's boots had once dragged mud past the hearth. She crouched, touched it with 2 fingers, and didn't flinch. "Boy," she said into the boards, "I hope you saw." The house, for once, didn't echo back with ache. Night settled into a new arrangement. Ellie lit 2 candles after sundown and let them burn to knuckles of wax. She spoke aloud while mending or sharpening nothing grand, just the talk people do when they are no longer alone in the ways that matter. She told them of a fox she'd seen slipping the fence line, of a storm that canged its mind, of how coffee tastes different when sorrow loosens its grip on the cup. She didn't ask forgiveness anymore. She thanked the mountain for being patient with a woman who learned slow. On the 4th day, the sheriff returned with a minister and a ledger. Words were said at the spruce spare, clean, neither bargaining nor flinching. He opened the town book and wrote careful lines. 2 travelers found rest on the ridge. Ellie Jameson kept the fire. Names went into the page like seeds under thawing ground. "So you don't have to carry it by yourself," Pike said. Ellie nodded, surprised at how light the air became with ink. "You did right to come," she said. "Right belongs to more than one pair of hands." Spring began with a sound she almost didn't recognize, water running under ice, impatient. Snow slumped from the eaves in soft collapses. The spruce darkened to its truest green. Ellie dug small beds near the porch and planted seeds May had left in a paper twist. She pressed each into soil as if tucking in a child. "Marigold for Ruth," she said. "Sweet alyssum for Samuel. They smell like memory." She tamped the earth and leaned back on her heels. Far below, the valley's bells rang for Sunday. For once, she didn't need to pretend she couldn't hear. That evening, she set the letter in a tin and slid it under the floorboard beside her own unsent pages. Not to hide, only to keep safe the truth that had finally found its way home. She poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one by the empty rocker facing the fire. "You asked to stay one night," she said softly. "I reckon you can stay as long as the candles want to." The flames nodded in the draft, learning her yes. Outside, the mountain loosened its breath. Inside, a woman who had buried winter made room for spring. Spring widened into summer the way breath widens into a song you finally remember. The ridge uncurled from snow and shook out color greens loud as laughter, blues that felt washed clean. Ellie Jameson moved slower on purpose, like a person who understood that speed can't buy meaning. Each morning she carried water to the marigolds and alyssum at the spruce, speaking the names she'd carved. Bees stitched the air with gold thread. Down valley, word had gone around. The cowgirl on the ridge kept a faithful fire. Folks repeated it as a curiosity, then as a comfort, then as a fact. The first knock of summer came shy and early, a freighter's daughter with a split boot and a blister blooming mean. Ellie sat her on the porch, heated water, and cut the leather cleaner than mercy sometimes looks. "Walk on your heel 2 days," she said. "Let pain choose smaller steps." The girl swallowed tears and nodded. When she left, she took a slice of cornbread and a story about the ridge that didn't include ghosts. Ellie watched her go, feeling the strange lift that comes when usefulness replaces apology. The mountain, pleased with the trade, softened its wind. Later, May from the mercantile rode up with a parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine. Inside lay jars, labels penned neat, salve, horehound syrup, willow tincture. "For what comes knocking," May said, avoiding the crosswind of gratitude. Ellie set the jars on a shelf above the table as if arranging small moons. "I'll keep account," she offered. May shook her head. "Write what matters instead." They stood quiet, looking at the door. "You always did," May added. Ellie glanced at the ledger on the mantel where the letter slept. "I'm learning to." The jars caught light like promises. By midsummer, the valley forgot how to be suspicious. Children waved from wagons when they spotted smoke on the ridge. Riders lifted fingers in greeting without the hedge of rumor. Sheriff Pike stopped by twice, once with seed for late crops, once with an old book of hymns that had lost half its pages and none of its use. "Town asked me to bring this," he said, embarrassed by the errand of kindness. Ellie set it near the rocker and found she liked reading words that didn't ask anything from her voice. The mountain approved, answering in birdsong. One hot afternoon a dust-soured drifter appeared thin, fire-eyed, all edges. He leaned on her fence like a man resisting gravity. "Water?" he rasped. Ellie handed him the dipper and waited while he considered thirst. "You sleep under my roof, you leave your meanness with your boots," she said. He blinked. "I ain't mean just empty." "Empty's a start," she replied. She fed him stew in silence until his shoulders lowered. Before dawn he was gone, but the dipper sat clean on the rail, and a small stack of kindling leaned against the door. The mountain smiled without teeth. Storms still wandered through, but thunder no longer sounded like judgment. Ellie learned to read their pace, the way she'd learned to read grief. Watch the dark edges first, make room, lay out what you'll need. Let the worst pass without naming it arrival. On hard nights, she lit 2 candles and spoke aloud for the strangers who had taught her how to host absence without letting it eat the whole table. "You're safe here," she'd say. Not to ghosts, but to the sharp air that once pretended to be their shape. The flames bowed, agreeing. A letter came up from the valley in August, borne by a boy with grass-nicked knees. It was from Ruth and Samuel's niece in the Low Country ink. "Careful, grief newer than the paper. We heard what you did. They always walked toward good light. We feared they'd never reach it. Thank you for giving them an address." Ellie sat on the porch with the letter, the boy slurping lemonade. "You want a reply carried back?" he asked. She nodded, then wrote slowly. They made it home. The boy folded the page with ceremony and raced the wind downhill. Harvest crept up from the valley, smoke scented with apples, wagons singing iron, hands turning hay into history. Ellie rode down twice to help stack, and twice to say no to invitations she didn't owe anyone. In town, Mrs. Pike pressed a jar of peaches into her hands. For the ridge, she insisted. Ellie took them, startled by sweetness preserved beyond its season. On the way back, she stopped at the hollow where James had lost the trail years ago. It looked smaller now, less capable of swallowing a boy. "I'm bigger," she told the ground. The ground agreed. In early autumn, the first frost primed the world for tenderness. Ellie laid extra quilts on the rocker for bodies that might arrive tired. She set a lamp in the window, not as beacon, but as declaration. This room understands winter. One evening, Harlan the Sawyer brought his sister's baby up, colicky and blue with crying. "We wore the road thin with pacing," he confessed. Ellie took the child, warm bundle of displeasure, and walked steady circles while the stove breathed. Babies, like storms, honor patience. The crying thawed into hiccups, then sleep. "You're a witch," Harlan whispered. "Just practiced," she said. When the first snow stuttered briefly and retreated, Ellie gathered what could be gathered, wood stacked, matches dry, herbs hung from rafters like a green prayer. She oiled the door hinges so Mercy wouldn't squeal when it entered. On the spruce hill, she repainted the letters that weather had tried to soften. She added a third word beneath their names: rest. It felt neither command nor plea, only a description that fit. From the ridge, she could see town lanterns blinking awake, a constellation that once made her feel left out. Now they looked like neighbors, breathing. Winter did what it always does, unbuttoned the sky and shook it out. The first real blizzard came sideways. Ellie snugged the shutters and fed the stove like a living thing. Near dusk, a knock arrived, reluctant, but decided. A couple stood there young, soaked, carrying a bundle, and the kind of eyes that haven't yet learned not to hope. "We don't want to take," the woman said, only to be pointed toward morning. Ellie stepped aside. "You'll get both," she answered. The bundle turned out to be a violin wrapped in oilcloth. Not a child. Somehow that made sense. They warmed quick, as people do when shame isn't charged at interest. The man tuned the violin between spoonfuls of stew, fingers remembering softness. After dishes, he played brokenly at first, then true as thaw water. The notes filled the rafters with something bigger than comfort. Ellie sat without fussing her hands, letting the sound wash the ridge clean. Ruth and Samuel's candles burned steady, as if music were a windproof glass. "That's payment enough," she said when the man tried to leave coins. "I'm paid up." Outside, the storm sighed and agreed to end early. Weeks layered into the shape of a season. Strangers weren't always lost. Sometimes they were simply tired of being found by the wrong things. Ellie learned to keep 3 mugs near the stove and 2 pairs of thick socks folded on the chair arm. People borrowed warmth and returned it as stories that didn't require her to fix them. At night, she wrote brief notes and slid them into the tin under the floorboard. Not confessions, just field reports, from a heart that had decided to remain. Today, the wind asked for nothing. I answered anyway. Near the solstice, Sheriff Pike came with a small procession. May, the schoolteacher, the minister, 3 children skipping Sirius. They carried a wooden box. "Town supper Friday," the sheriff said. "We made something foolish." Inside lay a plaque carved steady, "Ridge House a warm light." Ellie felt heat that wasn't the stove. "It's only my cabin," she protested. The teacher shook her head. "It's our sure thing." They fixed the plaque beside the door. Snow sifted down, landing in the letters like sugar. The children cheered without yelling. The mountain pretended not to watch and watched anyway. That night, alone again, Ellie brewed coffee and stood in the doorway, cup steaming into starlight. The plaque looked like a sentence she hadn't dared write herself. She traced the letters with one finger, then laughed quietly at her own tenderness. "All right," she told the door. "You and me are official." The wind pressed its face against the hinges and found them greased with welcome. Inside, the hymn book fell open to a page with no notes and a single line. "Keep the fire." She left it that way. Confident melody would come when it wanted. Depth winter arrived gentle that year, respectful of what had been learned. One morning Ellie woke to footprints already filling with snow small, hurried. She followed them outside to find a coyote crumpled near the fence, leg caught in wire. The animal's eyes were wide with pain and not malice. "Hush," Ellie said, voice that soothed foals. She cut the wire clean, wrapped the leg, and opened the gate. The coyote limped into the trees without looking back. "Rest," she called anyway. The cabin exhaled, proud of its woman. She set the wire aside and made more coffee than one person needs. And then, one late winter afternoon, when the light felt like linen, Ellie saw a boy on the ridge. Not James, not possible, but shaped like every version of him that might have grown. He kept his distance, hat too big, hunger registered in how he stood. "You lost?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Just tired." She pointed at the rocker. "Sit a while. The chair knows how to hold tired." He did. She gave him bread and a story about a mountain that remembered to be kind. He listened like a field listens to rain. Then he left, lighter. When the thaw finally lifted its shoulder under the snowpack, water ran, and birds rewrote the liturgy. Ellie took the hymn book to the spruce and read the blank page aloud, like it already held words. She spoke the names, then spoke her own, without flinching. "Ellie Jameson keeps the fire," she said to the valley, and it sounded neither boast nor plea, only true. Breeze moved through the needles, making a sound like gentle applause. She laughed at the mountain's manners. Somewhere, a fox yipped approval. Mercy, it turned out, was bilingual. On the first warm evening, people came uninvited and perfectly timed. May brought a pie that tasted like August, had learned patience. Harlan hauled up a rough bench. The freighter's daughter returned with boots that fit. The violinist tuned in the doorway. Children drew pictures in ash with sticks and didn't smudge the crosses. Sheriff Pike said a few words that wandered politely around gratitude. No one asked Ellie to speak. She poured coffee, refilled bowls, then sat on the step, hands quiet in her lap. Music braided the dusk to the ridge. Stars arrived early, curious. Later, when the last horsetail disappeared down the path and the plaque turned gold in lamplight, Ellie closed the door softly and stood with her palm on the wood. The room held warmth the way good stories do without hoarding. She set 2 cups by the fire and lit 2 candles, not from habit now, but from joy. "You asked for one night," she said to the presence that was no longer absence. "Stay as long as the mountain breeze." Outside, the spruce wore its dark like a blessing. Inside, a woman who had forgiven winter kept the fire, and the fire kept her.